In this exciting episode, we meet a man who's supposed to be a diamond pundit, but he's mostly an expert at being a schnook, and losing his shirt at the poker table, and winding up dead. It's Season 2, Episode 12 of Perry Mason, The Case of the Shattered Dream. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy, and my purpose here is pretty simple: provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll look at some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia, as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each episode in the law library, we return to prior cases to refresh our memories about Perry's past so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. The diamond in this episode is called either The Pundit's Dream by Adolf or Pundit Dream by everybody else. In any case, a pundit is an expert who's asked to give opinions on their area of specialization. So aptly, we have an expert witness.
Defense recognizes the witness as a qualified expert in the diamond trade.
Thank you, Counselor.
This caused me to ask what other kinds of expert witnesses have appeared in Perry's court. Well, we've got the man with the photographic memory in the case of the fugitive nurse. And then there's the woman who could read shoes like fingerprints in the case of the daring decoy. And then, of course, there's the more recognizable experts like Jack Holland, ballistics expert, who gets called to the stand in the case of the lucky loser.
Therefore, as an expert on ballistics, I consider this conclusive proof that the fatal bullet, Exhibit A, and these 8 bullets, Exhibit B, were fired from the same gun.
Don't forget the art experts. They were afoot in the case of the Purple Woman, and then there was Edward Langley, the tweed-wearing doofus from the case of the perjured parrot. Let's just say this: if you want to destroy a prosecutor's case, tear a hole in the testimony of his expert. And sometimes, Perry might be the only expert witness you need. Without further ado, let's get to the plot of this episode. The Case of the Shattered Dream. Hans Brill relies on the Brill cream in his impeccable hair and the foreign accent with which he whispers sweet nothings into the ears of several lovely ladies to make his living. Too bad he has to hang around with the guys, too. You know, like Bill Walker and his associate Jerry Morrow.
It's the 15th.
I know, Walker. I haven't got the money.
None of it?
No. $15,000 is a lot of money. My luck has been bad, and you wouldn't use that. You could kill a man.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. Would you, Jerry?
It'll be interesting to find out.
While Hans is getting in deep with the Vegas mob types, he's taking the women for all they're worth. Like Irene Bedford, a wealthy woman who does something.
I'll try to get 15,000, Irene.
15,000? Why, if the dream's cut properly, it's...
It's a very difficult stone, very risky. Sure, it can be worth 80,000. But if it shatters in cleavage, it won't be worth being swept up from the floor. No, 15,000, but safe, guaranteed.
How did you know I needed money right now?
Hans also has his eyes set on Virginia Trent, the owner of a jewelry store.
You really think it will work, Hans?
Darling, I promise you.
Oh, I want to believe you.
Then do.
And don't forget Sarah Werner, Perry's client.
That's a picture of my husband, Hugo, and my little girl, Kathy, taken 2 years ago in Chicago, Mr. Mason. Do you think that you'll be able to help me?
Well, Mrs. Werner, if your husband disappeared 18 months ago, why have you waited until now to try to find him?
But I have tried, as much as I was able. You see, Kathy and I inherited a joint trust fund of $90,000 from my father. Hugo persuaded me to let him invest the fund so the value could increase.
In our casting recall, we've got 2 prior defendants. The case of the desperate daughter's defendant, who's also the defendant in this case, and the defendant from the case of the green-eyed sister. Both are victims of Hans. Hans, he's a deadbeat dad, a jewelry fraudster, and a degenerate gambler. Why don't you complete the rundown, Paul?
Well, this Hugo Werner, or Hans Briel, whatever he calls himself these days, quite a character. Man about town, lover, gambler. And he works out of Trent & Company, a swank jeweler on Wilshire. And his gambling's got him in pretty deep with a character named Bill Walker. He owes him a bundle.
You know what happens. Hans gets $15,000 in the con he's running and then squanders it in a private poker game and then proceeds to shatter the diamond. Or so it appears.
I don't know any other kind of gambling where you can lose so quickly.
He leaves quickly with the shards and then ends up dead in his apartment. The prime suspect is Sarah Werner, and Perry's got some stern words for her.
Mrs. Werner, you're the wife of a murdered man. Don't you realize the police are going to investigate you whether you're here in Chicago or at the North Pole?
But since Perry's defending her, we know she can't be guilty. Could it have been the gamblers?
Jerry Morrow's boss, William Walker, has been in town the entire time.
You didn't go back to Las Vegas?
Nope, I'd call him a prime suspect except for one thing. He was in the poker game at the time of the murder, and he's got 7 witnesses, including Jerry Morrow.
Nope. Could it have been Hans's neighbor, the elderly Adolf von Beers?
All right, Mr. Mason. I killed him. I killed him because I couldn't stand what he had done to Virginia.
Adolf, no, you mustn't. He's trying to protect me.
Order. There will be order in this courtroom.
Well, Perry unearths that Adolf would do absolutely anything for Virginia Trent, but it's not him either. That leaves Irene Bedford.
You're trying to trip me up.
No, Miss Bedford, you tripped yourself up. You're so tangled in lies, I don't believe you know the truth from fiction.
I hated him. He wanted to get rid of me. Besides lying and cheating, he wanted to get rid of me.
You were still in love with him?
Yes.
Wait a minute. Did she do it because she loved him or she hated him? In Perry, it's probably both. And in the end, Adolf begins his long comeback campaign by successfully cutting the pundit dream. Even though Adolf was the one who called it the pundit's dream, but hey, let's not split carrots. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is something about a particular actor or actress in the episode. A Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero, our Paul. This episode involves perfume, in a detail that never really gets cleared up. The penniless Sarah Werner wears really expensive perfume. It's Della who identifies it.
Did you notice the perfume she was wearing?
Mm-hmm.
Eternity. $150 a half ounce.
Our Paul prompt for this episode. Was this a real perfume? If it wasn't, what was it replicating? Eternity by Calvin Klein showed up in 1988, so that can't be it. What are the equivalent prices of perfume on today's market? For instance, how much does Calvin Klein's Eternity sell for now? Our Della this week concerns Ivan Triso, Trisalt, Tresalt, Treisault, aka everyone's favorite diamond expert, Fred Schoenbeck.
It's probably the best approach, Brill.
Then you recommend cleaving like that?
If it must be done,
Ivan
yes.
was born Johann Constantine Trisalt, Treisault, in what was then the Russian Empire and is today Estonia. He started performing in his home country at the age of 14 before moving to the United States 4 years later. He worked on Broadway and then moved to Hollywood. Notable roles include Cry of the Werewolf, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Von Ryan's Express, and Batman, as well as The Wild Wild West. He died in 1980 due to cardiac failure at age 81. But you know how I know this guy? Two things. One, he's the meanest of the mean Nazis in Alfred Hitchcock's fantastic 1946 film Notorious, one of my favorites.
I think, gentlemen, you can leave it to me to find some way. When you drive up to Petropolis, the road winds quite a bit. It is very high. There are some very awkward turns.
Also a fun bit role for him is in 1952's The Bad and the Beautiful, directed by Vincent Minnelli. And I love this scene where, as a film director, Ivan gets to clap back at the heavy-handed comments of movie producer Kirk Douglas.
You call that directing?
That is what I've been calling it for 32 years.
Why, there are values and dimensions in that scene you haven't begun to hit.
Perhaps they're not the values and dimensions I wish to hit. I could make this scene a climax. I could make every scene in this picture a climax. If I did, I would be a bad director.
If you can't wait for more Ivan, don't worry. We'll see him again in a 1964 episode titled The Case of a Place Called Midnight. Our Perry this episode involves Perry's lunchtime drink of choice.
Thank you.
And the coffee's mine.
And also the check.
Now, the past couple of episodes, we've gotten some great shots inside Clay's Grill. We know it's Clay's Grill from Season 1. The place hasn't actually been named in Season 2, but we can tell. Now, we don't know what Perry has with that coffee yet, but whatever it is, he'll take it with some Joe. The theme of this episode is gambling. Bob Kimber, Glenn Faulkner, you know these names. We've seen gambling addicts before. But Bob Kimber, he was set up by Sam Link and his crooked cards. And Glenn Faulkner, he knows his problem was that he trusts his gut. You know how we know Hans is no good? This dude coughed up $15,000 in a legit game of poker, no hint of any funny business, and never thought to himself, I've got a problem. In fact, if it weren't for the level head of his poker mate, he would have gone further in the hole. And we don't get the sense that the dealer was doing anything shady with the cards. Of course, the big gamble involves the pundit dream. To cut or not to cut. Fred Schoenbeck calls diamond cutting gambling.
I don't know any other kind of gambling where you can lose so quickly.
We had to try.
$100,000 one moment, chips and splinters the next.
And so, we have two motives for taking a gamble, for engaging in risky behavior in order to gain a reward. Selfish gain, Hans, and helping others, Adolf. Well, straight up trauma for Adolf as he walked with the chisel in hand to cut the pundit dream. But because his motives were pure, the gamble pays off. Now, it's time for a Perry proverb. Perry is a life coach, and intriguingly, his best advice in this episode goes not to his client, whose inability to pay him is hinted at but never addressed, but to Adolf, the once great diamond cutter, who's now too afraid of losing.
Other things measure a man's stature, Mr. Van Beers. Important things like dignity, self-respect, courage, a mind that's not filled with doubt. Virginia wants that for you above all else.
Now, whether it's correlation or causation, Adolf completes the successful cut. Keep those speeches coming, Perry, and maybe you'll get yourself a cut of those diamonds down the line. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
In our last episode, our Paul prompt involved cookbooks. Remember that Ellen Monteith has checked out a cookbook from the local public library, where she herself is an employee, in order to presumably make dinner for her new husband.
The book is a cookbook by Valentine Prosper.
Our prompt: what real cookbook could this fake cookbook have been modeled on? Myra Carraway and Dennis Willett both recommended The Joy of Cooking, first published in the 1930s, published privately in 1931 by Irma Rombauer, a homemaker in St. Louis, Missouri. The book was published widely in 1936 and is now considered the most popular American cookbook. Certainly a very good model for the public library held cookbook in the case of the perjured parrot. Myra also recommended the 1950 published Betty Crocker picture cookbook. Now, Betty Crocker's cookbook had been in print since 1930, but 1950 was the first time they added pictures. Also a massively popular cookbook. It's hard to tell, we don't get to look inside the cookbook. There are times when I wonder whether it would have been too much of a product placement for them to simply make it an actual cookbook. I mean, it is in a library after all. Thanks to Dennis and Myra for doing that work. A couple other emails worth mentioning. Chris Snyder suggests we start looking for the kind of murder weapons on which Lieutenant Tragg, quote, leaves his mark. That's quite a morbid legacy, Lieutenant, and I think that would be a really good idea. So if I see them in future episodes, I will certainly point them out. A quick note from Sarah Seidel reminds me that if you're watching episodes on MeTV, FETV, anywhere in syndication, you're going to notice cuts. The original episodes are over 50 minutes long. Syndication demands they be less than 45 minutes. And usually they try to leave the plot intact. What I've found as I've gone over the episodes meticulously for each episode is that what usually gets axed are fun bits of dialogue. And Sarah pointed out in her email that it's some of Paul's fun comments that have gotten the axe in season 2 episodes. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode or the podcast in general. Was there something about the episode you'd like to comment on or something you'd like to correct? You can email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find that link in the show notes. All PerryPod episodes are available via Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thanks again for joining me on this pod journey. Join us next time as we discover what tangled webs we weave when first we practice to be hired by private investigators to impersonate other people. It's the case of the borrowed brunette. Join me, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat.